What was the most disturbing movie you watched in 2026? Can't remember? Don't worry, because today on Top 2 Day, we're counting down 10 absolutely best, terrifying, and extremely disturbing movies released in 2026. But before we begin, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Now, let's get started with number 10. Number 10, Iron Lung, 2026. Most movies based on video games are made by large studios with massive budgets. Iron Lung took a different approach. The adaptation of this small indie horror game was produced for only around $3 million, a surprisingly small budget by modern Hollywood standards. The film is based on a small indie horror game released in 2022 by developer David Zemansky. In the game, you play as a convict tasked with piloting a tiny submarine through an ocean of blood on a distant moon, while photographing mysterious objects hidden beneath its surface. What makes the adaptation especially interesting is that it was directed by Markiplier, one of the biggest YouTubers in the world. Many people expected another failed YouTuber movie. Instead, the project surprised both critics and audiences, and despite receiving mixed reviews from some critics, it remains a fascinating passion project that is absolutely worth checking out. The story takes place in a bleak future, after a mysterious event known as the Quiet Rapture. Most stars and inhabited planets have disappeared without explanation. Humanity is struggling to survive, and a prisoner is offered a chance at freedom in exchange for completing a dangerous mission. His task sounds simple: pilot a small submarine through an ocean of blood discovered on a distant moon. What makes Iron Lung disturbing is not gore or violence. In fact, most of the movie takes place inside a tiny submarine where you can barely see anything outside. The horror comes from isolation, claustrophobia, and the constant feeling that something enormous may be watching from the darkness beyond the hull. Much like the game itself, it constantly forces your imagination to fill in the blanks. And often what you imagine is far worse than anything the movie could actually show. Whether you're a fan of the original game or not, Iron Lung is one of the most unusual horror films released in 2026, and a surprisingly successful example of how an indie game can become a genuinely effective horror movie. Number 9. 28 years later, The Bone Temple, 2026. Back in 2002, 28 Days Later helped redefine the zombie genre and became one of the most influential horror films of its generation. More than 20 years later, the franchise returned once again with 28 Years Later, The Bone Temple. The story takes place decades after the original outbreak. Humanity has adapted to a world forever changed by the rage virus, but survival does not necessarily mean safety. Entire generations have now grown up knowing nothing but the collapse of civilization. Without going too deep into spoilers, the film explores what happens when societies begin rebuilding after decades of fear, isolation, and violence. The infected remain a threat, but some of the most disturbing moments come from the survivors themselves and the strange new world they have created. Unlike the first 28 Years Later film, this one was received much more positively by both audiences and critics. Personally, I enjoyed it far more as well. The movie feels darker, more focused, and significantly more memorable. Ralph Fiennes is one of the highlights in this movie. His character is responsible for several of the film's strongest scenes, bringing a strange mix of intelligence, tragedy, and unease to the story. The final sequence involving the Doctor is especially memorable, and won't leave many viewers indifferent. For longtime fans of the franchise, the film hides a very intriguing tease for the third installment right at the end. Overall, after introducing us to the world and its characters in a more divisive first entry that didn't work for everyone, Danny Boyle finally seems to have found the formula again. Not only does The Bone Temple breathe new life into the franchise, but it also gives the zombie genre itself a much-needed shot of energy. A must-watch horror film of 2026. Number 8. Heal, 2026. Most disturbing movies feature monsters, killers, or supernatural threats. Heal takes a different approach. Its horror comes from a much more uncomfortable question. What if someone genuinely believed they could fix another human being? The film follows a violent young offender whose life changes after he is abducted by a seemingly ordinary family. At first, their intentions appear almost noble. They claim they want to help him, reform him, and turn him into a better person. But very quickly it becomes obvious that their methods are anything but normal. What follows is a disturbing psychological battle where the line between rehabilitation, punishment, and outright abuse becomes increasingly difficult to define. As the situation escalates, both the audience and the characters are forced to ask who the real monster actually is. In their attempt to turn Tommy into a better person, the family is forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Keeping someone against their will is not an act of love. At the same time, Tommy experiences something completely unfamiliar to him: genuine care. It may come in the form of punishment, strict rules, and even a dog collar. But beneath all of that lies a simple idea. For the first time in his life, someone believes he is worth saving. What I found especially interesting is that beneath all the disturbing moments, the movie is really asking whether people can truly change. And if they can, how far should someone be allowed to go in order to force that change? The result is an uncomfortable, thought-provoking thriller that stays with you long after it ends. It may not be the most shocking film on this list, but it is easily one of the most psychologically disturbing. Number 7. Undertone, 2025. Technically, Undertone premiered in 2025. However, after being picked up by A24 and receiving a much wider theatrical release in 2026, it quickly found a much larger audience. As a result, many horror fans now associate it more with 2026 than with its original festival debut. The film follows Evie, a paranormal podcast host who receives a series of disturbing audio recordings from an anonymous sender. The recordings initially seem harmless, but with each new file, the mystery becomes darker, stranger, and increasingly disturbing. On the recordings, she hears fragments of conversations, desperate screams, strange noises, and what appears to be evidence connected to a violent crime she may not be prepared to investigate. What makes Undertone stand out is its sound design. In fact, that is exactly what most critics and viewers ended up talking about. The movie was even marketed as the scariest movie you'll ever hear. And whether you love or hate the film, it's difficult to argue with that aspect. Much of the horror comes from voices, noises, recordings, and things happening just outside the viewer's field of vision. The movie was made for a budget of only around $500,000 and was filmed almost entirely inside a single house, which makes its success even more impressive. Despite its tiny budget, the film managed to become a box office hit and earned more than $20 million worldwide. Personally, I wouldn't call Undertone the scariest movie of the year, but I would absolutely call it one of the most unique. If you enjoy slow burn horror, creepy audio recordings, and movies that rely more on atmosphere than jump scares, this is definitely one worth checking out. Number 6. Faces of Death, 2026. The original Faces of Death is one of the most infamous shockumentaries ever created. Released in 1978, it became a legend among horror fans because many people genuinely believed they were watching real footage of death. Today we know that a significant portion of the film was staged. However, some of the most disturbing footage featured in the movie was completely real, which only added to its controversial reputation and helped turn it into a cult phenomenon. Decades later, the franchise returned with a completely different approach. This time, the story follows a content moderator who discovers a series of disturbing videos connected to a killer recreating murders inspired by the original film. Instead of simply remaking the 1978 movie, the filmmakers decided to build an entirely new story around its legacy and reputation. Honestly, I thought this movie was going to be much worse than it actually turned out to be. It lands on this list largely because of its connection to the original Faces of Death. Fans of the franchise will notice numerous references, recreations, and callbacks to some of the most infamous scenes from the 1978 film. Dacre Montgomery deserves special mention here. His portrayal of Arthur, the film's main killer, is easily one of the strongest parts of the movie. He manages to be both charismatic and deeply unsettling at the same time, which makes every scene involving him much more enjoyable to watch. What I liked most is that the movie understands why the original became famous in the first place. Rather than simply trying to shock the audience, it updates the concept for the internet age, exploring viral videos, content moderation, and society's growing obsession with watching disturbing content online. Is it a masterpiece? Probably not. But as a modern horror thriller packed with references to one of the most controversial horror films ever made, Faces of Death is definitely worth watching, especially with a group of friends, and without expecting any deep meaning or hidden message. Number 5. The Darkest Web 2026. Unlike most entries on this list, The Darkest Web is not a horror movie. It's a BBC documentary available for free on YouTube, but it raises extremely disturbing issues that are impossible to ignore. The documentary follows an international network of undercover investigators whose mission is to infiltrate some of the darkest corners of the internet and identify people involved in the exploitation of children. Working across borders, these investigators attempt to track offenders hiding behind anonymous networks and encrypted platforms. What makes the film so effective is that it doesn't focus on the criminals themselves. Instead, it focuses on the people trying to stop them. Through real investigations and first-hand accounts, the documentary shows just how difficult and emotionally exhausting this work can be. Another reason I wanted to include it on this list is because it offers one of the freshest looks at the problem currently available. Many documentaries covering internet crime are already years out of date by the time most people watch them. The Darkest Web focuses on how these networks operate today and the challenges law enforcement faces in the modern internet age. For those who have never heard about anything like this before, the investigation shown in the documentary will be a genuine eye-opener. The stories of the detectives involved reveal an entire hidden world that most people never even realize exists. A shadow industry operating far beyond the view of ordinary internet users. As expected from the BBC, the production quality is excellent. The documentary is well-researched, professionally made, and manages to explain a very complex issue without ever becoming confusing or sensationalized. It's not an easy watch, and it's definitely not entertainment in the traditional sense. But if you're interested in documentaries that expose the darker side of the internet, The Darkest Web is absolutely worth your time, and one of the strongest documentaries released in 2026. Number 4. Hokum 2026. If you've seen Oddity 2020, then you already know why so many horror fans were excited for Hokum. Both films were directed by Damian McCarthy, who is quickly becoming one of the most interesting names in modern horror. The story follows a bitter and alcoholic writer, played by Adam Scott. After the death of his parents, he travels to a remote hotel in rural Ireland to scatter their ashes. Unfortunately for him, the hotel has a dark reputation. Guests keep talking about a witch, strange disappearances, and a locked honeymoon suite that nobody is supposed to enter. What follows is a mix of ghost story, mystery, Irish folklore, and psychological horror. The less you know going in, the better. Half of the fun comes from slowly figuring out what is really happening inside the hotel. Personally, this was one of the biggest surprises of 2026 for me. The atmosphere is excellent, the mystery is engaging, and Adam Scott does a great job in the lead role. There are several genuinely creepy scenes, but what I enjoyed most was how the film constantly keeps you guessing. Just when you think you figured everything out, it changes direction again. There is a new wave of horror directors gaining serious attention right now. Names like Oz Perkins, Zach Kreger, and Damian McCarthy. Of course, horror gets a new genius every few years, and not all of them manage to stay interesting for long. Some disappear as quickly as they arrive. But McCarthy feels different. His work has a very classical understanding of horror, yet it never feels old-fashioned. He takes familiar genre foundations and builds something fresh on top of them, mixing folk history, strong atmosphere, memorable characters, and a strange sense of justice that almost feels biblical. If you're a fan of atmospheric horror in films like Oddity or The Others, Hokum is absolutely worth watching, and easily one of the strongest horror releases of 2026. Number 3. The Backrooms 2026. The Backrooms is based on one of the most famous internet horror stories ever created. What started as a single image posted online eventually grew into thousands of theories, videos, games, and short films. In 2026, it finally received a full-length movie adaptation. The premise is simple. Somewhere beyond reality exists an endless maze of empty yellow rooms, fluorescent lights, and endless corridors. No one knows where it came from. No one knows what lives inside it. And most importantly, nobody knows how to escape. The film follows a group of people who find themselves trapped inside this strange and seemingly infinite world after a series of unexplained events. As they search for a way out, they begin discovering that the Backrooms are far larger and far more dangerous than they initially imagined. What makes the Backrooms particularly effective is that it understands what made the original internet phenomenon so unsettling in the first place. The horror does not come from constant jump scares or monsters chasing the characters every 5 minutes. Instead, it comes from isolation, uncertainty, and the feeling that reality itself is somehow broken. The movie also expands the mythology considerably. Longtime fans will recognize familiar locations, theories, and creatures from the online lore, while newcomers can still follow the story without needing to spend hours reading internet forums. One of the most impressive aspects of the film is its atmosphere. The endless yellow hallways, flickering lights, abandoned offices, and impossible architecture create a constant sense of unease. Even when nothing is happening, the viewer feels uncomfortable. Critics have also praised the film for taking what could have been a simple internet cash grab and turning it into a surprisingly effective horror movie. Many reviews highlighted its visual design, sound work, and ability to capture the same feeling of dread that made the original Backrooms image so famous online. The result is one of the most unique horror films of 2026 and proof that internet horror can still work on the big screen when handled by people who genuinely understand the source material. Number 2. Maternal Instinct, 2026. My choice for the number 2 spot may seem a little unusual. However, the case explored in Maternal Instinct is easily one of the most shocking, disturbing, and genuinely frightening criminal cases I have ever come across. The deeper the documentary goes, the harder it becomes to believe that these events actually happened in real life. This documentary tells the story of Taylor Parker, a woman who spent months pretending to be pregnant. She posted fake ultrasound images, organized baby-related events, and convinced friends and family that she was expecting a child. The problem was that none of it was real. As the documentary unfolds, we learn just how far Parker was willing to go to maintain the illusion, and the deeper the story goes, the more disturbing it becomes. What initially sounds like a strange case of deception slowly transforms into one of the most shocking true crime stories in recent memory. What makes the documentary so effective is that it constantly forces you to ask the same question: how did nobody realize what was happening? Looking back, there were warning signs everywhere. Yet somehow, the lie continued growing until it reached a horrifying conclusion. I won't spoil the details because this is one of those cases where the less you know going in, the better. But I will say this: few documentaries released in 2026 left me as uncomfortable as this one. A deeply disturbing true crime story that proves reality can sometimes be far more frightening than fiction. Number 1. Obsession, 2026. Usually, the number 1 spot on lists on this channel goes to a documentary. This time, however, things are different. Because while 2026 gave us plenty of good horror films, only one managed to completely dominate horror discussions online. That film is Obsession. The story follows Bear, an introverted young man hopelessly in love with a girl named Nikki. At first, the movie almost feels like an awkward romantic comedy. Bear rehearses conversations in his head, struggles to express his feelings, and constantly finds himself sabotaged by his own insecurity. One day, after once again failing to confess his feelings, Bear decides to use a mysterious artifact known as the One Wish Willow. According to the legend, if you break the small wooden wand, one wish will come true. Bear wishes for Nikki to love him more than anything else in the world. What he doesn't realize is that sometimes wishes come with a price. From that point on, the film slowly transforms from an awkward romance into something far darker and far more disturbing. What initially seems like a dream come true gradually turns into a nightmare for everyone involved. The director was clearly inspired by Japanese horror films such as Pulse and The Ring, which is why many of the scares and horror sequences feel genuinely creepy and memorable. The cast is excellent across the board, but Inde Navarrete absolutely steals the show as Nikki. Her performance is one of the biggest reasons the film works so well. She manages to be charming, sympathetic, unsettling, obsessive, and genuinely terrifying, sometimes within the very same scene. Special respect also goes to the car scene. Anyone who has seen the film will probably agree that it was one of the strongest moments in the entire movie. Funny, uncomfortable, disturbing, tragic, and surprisingly clever, Obsession became one of the biggest horror surprises of 2026. For me, this one is the best horror movie of 2026 so far. So, that's it for today. I hope you found a few disturbing movies to add to your watch list this year, or maybe even a reason to visit your local theater. 2026 has already given us some surprisingly strong horror movies, and it'll be interesting to see what the rest of the year brings. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Also, let me know in the comments, what was your favorite horror or disturbing movie of 2026 so far? I read every single comment, and if you know a movie that deserves to be on this list, make sure to share it below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.